Good afternoon, everyone. We are inside China Business. Western Europe has an energy dependency problem. They don't have nearly enough domestic energy sources of their own, so they have to import a lot of it from outside, from countries outside the EU. This is one of the factors that's driving them to adopt renewable energy technology, solar and wind. The problem here is that China has a monopoly on all the low-cost production in those industries. So Europe is dependent either on foreign countries to supply them the energy that they need, or they're dependent on China to build the equipment that they need to generate some of the electricity themselves. It seems to us that they're better off buying from China because these are a one-off. Once they buy the windmills and then once they buy the solar panels from China, and it's installed, they can now be producing power whenever the wind is blowing and the sun is shining. That seems better than picking up the phone and asking Russia to send some more gas down a pipe, or the Middle East to put some more energy on a ship whenever they run out and they need more. The problem, though, is that Europe has solar panel manufacturers who are threatened by Chinese competition. And so now they're wrestling about what to do about it all. So let's go through it. In a previous video, we shared how solar panel manufacturers in the United States were struggling to compete against Chinese competition, against Chinese companies that can build solar panels much less expensively. And so solar panel manufacturers in the US are pushing for tariffs and import quotas on Chinese hardware. Now Europe is having the same problem with their solar panel industry. But Europe and America are very different. Europe is not self-sufficient in energy. North America is. North America has abundant fossil fuels, but Europe has to import most of it. So Europe is much more dependent on imported energy. In fact, it's more dependent today than at any time going back to 1990. Germany alone needs to import 68% of its energy from abroad now. And Germany is the leading manufacturing power in the EU and needs cheap and reliable energy if they're going to be able to compete at all. German factories are relocating to China for several reasons. Many of their customer markets are here, obviously. It's a lower cost of labor, but also in the interior provinces of China where the German factories are moving to, electricity and power costs are less than a third, 30% of what their rates are in Germany. So Europe is struggling here with two competing realities. First, they need to aggressively build out their solar power industry in order to meet the European Union mandates on clean energy production. And for them, it's sensible anyway, because so much of their power comes from outside the EU. That's the first reality. But the second is that only Chinese companies can produce the equipment that they need at a competitive cost that enables their energy consumers to want to switch over. So in 2023, Europe installed 40% more solar than they had in 2022. And that was a record year up to that point. The International Energy Agency estimates, though, that a huge percentage of all those panels were coming from China, as much as 95% in some cases. So last year, European solar energy executives approached governments there and asked them to buy up excess inventories of their products and to protect European makers by putting on tariffs and import restrictions on Chinese-made products. Regulators in Europe who work for governments don't really know what to do now. The European solar industry is even divided on what to do. On the one hand, you have solar panel manufacturers in Europe who are going bankrupt, going out of business by low-cost panels from China. But the European green energy industry itself is opposed to anything that drives up the cost for the consumers. The consumers ultimately have a choice whether to use their own solar panels on their own properties or to keep plugging into the grid, most of which comes from foreign, imported energy. They don't want anything to discourage the sales of solar installations there in Europe. They were watching what's going on in America and how this debate is causing solar panel costs to go up in the United States, and that is discouraging customers from switching over. Industry officials in Europe are concerned about the same thing, that if consumers are deterred from making the switch over, Europe is going to be continued dependence on foreign suppliers to meet their energy needs. So key players here in the European Union's solar power industry strongly urge policymakers and regulators to not put tariffs on solar imports. Solar Power Europe, that's a major trade organization, they said that putting trade barriers on would be a lose-lose strategy for Europe. There's another complicating factor, which is how solar panels are themselves made. Solar panels require ingots and wafers, and China controls 90% of that market. Now, the solar panel manufacturers in Europe and in America say we should assemble the solar panels here, even though they admit they're buying most of these ingots and wafers from China. And so their thinking is, we can assemble the solar panels in Europe, or we can assemble them in the United States and just have Chinese suppliers send us the components that we need to do the final assembly here. Industry insiders, though, they think this is a risky gamble, that it might not work, because if the Chinese solar panel manufacturers are kicked out of the European market, there's nothing to say they can't just dramatically raise the price on the materials that go in that they need to buy. So the problem here is that China is not only the low-cost manufacturer of these solar panels, they are the only manufacturer of most of the things that go into the solar panel. So this is all a total mess. And it's another example of how China's total dominance, monopoly, on the very top of a key supply chain means they can dictate strategy and price all the way down to the bottom. So in this case, American and European now, solar panel manufacturers, we acknowledge that we need China to keep making these parts for us if we're going to assemble solar panels competitively to compete against China. I'll share key parts of the articles now. We give about 6 to 8 seconds for readers to go through the material. If you need more than that, it's a good idea just to pause the screen or take a screenshot. Thank you. Be good.